let me just ask you one thing regarding that. So you're saying, Hank, that the God of the universe, the God who had the whole plan of salvation and all of that, wasted his time. I'm gonna not really, but I mean wasted his time by deciding to give you a dream naming Mutsby, including the spelling.
Yeah.
What does that tell you about the God you serve that he would do that?
Well, I think it says a lot about how loving and how creative he is, but how much God has a sense of humor. And he doesn't give anything to us to be wasted. He gives it for not only his honor and his glory, but to touch somebody else's life. And that's really what I did with the children's material is I just took what he gave me and I just want to honor him and I want to make him laugh and I also want to bless a generation of children and families.
That's
And
so good. And the different words he'll do and names he'll invent. Now, I had a dream, extremely vivid dream back in 1989 or 90, one of those 2 years where we lived in Texas. And the Lord said, and I saw the spelling, and it said Buxby, which is a name I haven't found. I think I found one time. And it said, Nate Buxby is in heaven and he's doing fine. And it was extremely specific. And I've never been able to pin that down, but I thought God took his time to spell it. And I kept saying, I woke up and I kept saying, Buxby, Buxby. Well, there's Bixby all over the place, but there's not a Buxby. And I thought, why did God tell me Nate Buxby's in heaven and he's doing fine? Well, how would you handle a thing like that? What would you do with something like that?
Wow. You know what? I would just continue to pray on it because, again, dreams sometimes when you first have them, look at Joseph. He didn't have any idea what his dream meant until, time later. And then he realized, okay, this is really what this dream meant. And I heard Sunil say something on our service last night. He preached at our church and he talked about the sun and the moon and the stars that bowed down to Joseph in the dream really were symbols of the Egyptian gods. And God was trying to speak to him that he would have some time that he would have to spend in Egypt. And he didn't know it. So dreams are progressive. But I will say this, whenever God gives a dream like that, write it down, hold on to it, pray about it, bring it back before the Lord and say, Lord, you gave this to me. I don't understand what this means. Also submit it to those that have a gifting and an anointing in dreams. I've had other people interpret it for me and it made more sense. But I want to say this about the dream that I had with Mutsby. When I first created Mutsby here, and let me go this way, the Lord gave that dream to me and that was really the beginning of my prophetic journey. People always ask me, Hank, how do you hear from God? And I always tell people it's, three primary ways. And you see it on the day of Pentecost. There came a sound from heaven. So it was something that they heard as a rushing mighty wind. And so it was something they also felt or they perceived. So God also speaks not by only hearing, but something you hear. But they also saw what appeared to be cloven tongues of fire settled upon their heads. So God moves or speaks by something we hear, see, or perceive or feel. In this case, God began to give me my prophetic journey of hearing. He started speaking to me in dreams, and I didn't even understand what they meant. And so I just started acting on it. If I saw something in a dream, I would write it down. I remember shortly after that, how God began to speak to me. There was a young girl in our neighborhood who was hit by a big truck, and she was just learning to drive. Wow. And she was in a coma. And the whole neighborhood was just rocked with this girl that they were saying she was going to die. And all of a sudden, the Lord appeared to me in a dream. And that was the first time, and this was like 1984. And he walked in on the hospital room, touched her, and it was on Resurrection Sunday. Now, this was probably 3 weeks prior. And I went all over the neighborhood telling people that the Lord was going to walk in. She would be healed on Resurrection Sunday. Everybody thought I was a nut, but you know what? It happened. And that's when I began to pay attention to this God that speaks. And so they gathered me all, the neighbors gathered me around the light pole, and some of them were making fun of me, saying, well, God doesn't give dreams and all this. He doesn't speak today. So I didn't know how to tell people that God spoke. So I went and grabbed a bunch of encyclopedias and began to try to look through, to try to prove that God spoke. But
really?
Yeah. But then the Lord started reading their mail. And so as I was standing there talking to certain people, God was telling me things about their lives. So pay attention to your dreams, pay attention to things that, all of a sudden you're walking and you hear something, it's to get your attention. Mark it down, pay attention to it. Because sometimes it's the progression of how prophetic revelation will increase in your life. So that's what I would say on dreams.
One last question on dreams while I'm here, because I have 2 or 3 people now that speak into my life, and they'll have very specific dreams, and they'll say, God's saying such and such about this stock. God's saying such and such about this cryptocurrency. Does God concern himself with that kind of thing?
Yeah, he does, because, when God, first of all, it depends upon what your positional assignment is by God in the earth and what God's agenda is. So I say it this way, God reveals things to me all the time in dreams or in visions, or he'll come, he'll send messengers to speak to me that have to deal with things on a bigger level. But even individuals, here, look at Joseph. Who was Joseph? He was just a young boy, and God began to give him prophetic dreams. And as he stayed with it, notice how it progressed to eventually the information got more detailed, and so did his platform, in which the dreams that God gave him would be impactful. He was now speaking to the head of a nation. So I would say God does inject himself, and he will reveal, because the Bible calls him the revealer of secrets. And that's what God does in dreams. He'll tell you things that isn't in the news yet, or he'll tell you things ahead of the news, or he will even tell you to make news. And so we have to pay attention to some of those things. But always remember with dreams, and this is what I want to say to people, because a lot of people are having dreams now, and that's part of the prophetic fulfillment of Acts 2:16 on the day of Pentecost. Peter, rose and said, "This is that which was spoken by the prophet Joel in the last days, saith the Lord. I'll pour out my spirit upon all flesh. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your young men shall see visions. Your old men will dream dreams. And on my servants and my handmaidens in those days, saith the Lord, I will pour out my spirit, and they will prophesy." Prophesy is mentioned more than the dreams and visions. Wow. Dreams and visions are a type of prophecy, but they aren't to replace prophecy. And so there's a lot of prophecy or prophetic things going forth by dreams right now. And here's where we have to be careful. When it comes to, the inspiration of God through prophecy, that's in the moment. And you don't have a lot of time to think about it, process it. It's just the Spirit of the Lord comes on you, and you either write it and you say it. Dreams, where we have to be careful, as well as with prophecy, is there's the human filter factor. And it's what 1 Samuel 16, here you have this great prophet Samuel. None of his words, the Bible said, fell to the ground, and I'd love to talk about that in another time. It doesn't mean what people have interpreted it to mean, to bring indictment against the prophets, that they never can miss it. That's not what it was saying. But here you have this great prophet, and he shows up, and he begins to look at Eliab at the house of Jesse, to anoint the next king of Israel. And God has to tell him, look, you're in your head. You're looking at the outside. I look at the inward part, and there's someone on the backside that you haven't even considered, because you're processing it through your human filter. This is why Ezekiel, when the royal scroll came from God that had the word of the Lord to Ezekiel, he had to eat it, and he had to chew on it. Okay, what is that? That's your soul realm. You have to meditate on it. And depending upon what you've been watching, what you've been listening to, what you've been a part of, you will have that affect your conscious and your subconscious minds. And you will dream, when your dreams come, even from God, has to be processed through those filters, just like Samuel at the house of Jesse. So that's why I've listened to some people who are having prophetic dreams, and I'm going, you know what? They need a little bit more prophetic tempering, because not everything that they're saying is the thus saith the Lord. It's mixed with their own filter. And so we have to be careful, because it can bring misinformation out there.